Welcome into another episode of the Fat Guy Podcast. I am the Fat Guy. Most people call me Brett Mason. I'm glad to have you along on today's episode. Who am I? Well, I'm a guy who's been overweight since I was, 5 or 6 probably. Weight that compounded annually year by year by year until I reached a high weight of around 410 pounds or so. I've lost 125 pounds, most of that on a ketogenic diet, which is a low-carb, high-fat diet. I'm not a medical professional. I'm not a doctor. I don't have any formal medical training. I'm just a guy who spent hundreds of hours researching health, diet, nutrition, and applied it to my own life to get results so far and also help other people achieve results. Before beginning any kind of diet or weight loss or exercise program, you should consult with a doctor. And anything I say in this podcast is strictly my opinion or my experiences. It is not to be construed as medical or personal dietary advice for you. So you can follow the podcast the easy way. If you want to go back and see previous episodes, like we have episodes on how to try a ketogenic diet for 2 weeks, a simple way to do that. Understanding carbs, understanding fats, understanding proteins, understanding micronutrients, just a whole ton of different topics we cover. If you download the Spreaker app, Spreaker, Spreaker. If you download that app, it's free. Search for Fat Guy Podcast. Once you find it, follow us and like us, and you'll get notified about upcoming episodes. But you can also easily scroll down and access previous episodes that we've done to find topics that are of interest to you, or just listen to them all. Now look, if you're somebody that already does podcast on your Apple device or your Android device, and you're already familiar with those podcasting apps, then you, by all means, continue to use those. Just search for Fat Guy Podcast. We are in Apple Podcast, and we're also in the Google Play Store. You can also subscribe to us on social media and follow us, no matter if you prefer Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or even Snapchat. The username for all of those is Fat Guy Podcast, all one word, Fat Guy Podcast. So on Snapchat, you'll get pictures of stuff that I eat, so you can see what I eat in a day. On Instagram, you'll get before and after photos, maybe links to articles, etc., etc. Same thing on Facebook. All the podcasts are linked. A lot of articles are linked. Stories of people I worked with are linked, so you'll find that. And then Twitter is kind of a hodgepodge of all of it. Twitter just kind of posts links that I post on other media. I'm not that engaged in Twitter. As we discovered today, when I got into some kind of Twitter war with this guy who is just the rudest guy in the industry. He's outspoken advocate of a low-carb diet, specifically a carnivore diet, and that's not the problem I have with him. He's just a jerk. So I tell you, I find that you can get in wars on Twitter super easy. So I try to stay away from Twitter. And I fully recognize that that's a character flaw on my part. That is not an indictment on Twitter, right? I'm by no means indicting Twitter. I'm just acknowledging my personal weaknesses. So we're going to talk about the American Diabetes Association. Their website is diabetes.org. And it's not just them, but it's just the medical industry in general. It's just ruining the lives of diabetics. Now, my dad was a lifelong type 1 diabetic, also formerly known as juvenile diabetic. So these are people whose pancreas quit producing any insulin or any adequate amount of insulin. Generally, it happened in childhood. And so there's no hope for those people. It's not a dietary-induced diabetes like type 2 diabetes is, where you just abuse your body with too much sugar for so many years. Your body just finally says no mas and gives up. Either way, the proper way to eat to get the best health outcome is the same for either one of those, which coincidentally is not what the Diabetes Association recommends. I mean, when you read their propaganda, and it's no wonder why so many people with diabetes are dying from cardiovascular disease early, like my dad did at 60. My dad was healthy in every other way possible. He died way too young from that, and that was as a result of a lifetime of too much elevated insulin and too much carbohydrate. It leads to amputations. It leads to blindness. All these things, and there is a way to eat that if they would just recommend it, would get most people completely off all medications, or at the very least reduce your medications to the absolute minimum. The primary medication being insulin. So constant high elevated levels of insulin, serum insulin, this being the blood, is 100% linked to all these things. Double diabetics, and this is because of the way it's treated, diabetics have double the chances of dying from a heart attack or cardiovascular disease as the rest of the population. Now, it's not because their pancreas doesn't work. It's because the solution is they keep eating carbs and they keep slamming their body full of insulin. That's what causes it. So you would think that something reasonable would be recommended. You would think the medical profession, you would think the American Diabetes Association would vehemently recommend something that could get most people completely off insulin. And the most extreme cases, it would greatly reduce their insulin to nearly nothing. But that's not what they recommend. So I'm about to read and share directly from the diabetes.org website. This is the official website of the American Diabetes Association. This is from an official press release on eating a balanced diet. They quote previous reports going back to 2011 on how you should eat a balanced diet. Quote, a balanced diet isn't just for people with diabetes. It's an important guide for anyone following a healthy meal plan. So what does it consist of? And more important, how can it be applied in real life settings? One recommendation is to eat more nutrient-rich foods. I don't have a problem with that. It's a matter of shifting away from the foods that are empty calories and and towards those that are full of nutrients. Absolutely, I agree with that. Examples of nutrient-rich foods include seafood with high omega-3s. I agree with that, which are good fats and protect against cardiovascular disease. Fruits and vegetables. Don't think I would agree with that too much, etc., etc. Another example of nutrient-rich foods, and here's where they get off the rails. Another example of nutrient-rich foods include whole grains, which contain B vitamins, magnesium, and fiber. So they go on to talk about how you eat whole grain bread, whole grain rice, whole grain pasta. No. Someone who has insulin resistance to the point that they are now diabetic should not ever be eating any of those things. They continue, of course, the other side of a balanced diet involves eating less of the things that are bad for you, such as saturated and trans fats, sodium, refined grains, and added sugar. So, this is a mixed bag. Saturated fat, first of all, I'm pretty sure all of the research that's come out in the past 5 years has completely debunked this thing about saturated fat being bad for you, okay? So, let's let that go. Trans fats, 100%. The reason people eat trans fats, American diabetes, do you know why people eat trans fats? Because in the 70s, you said saturated fats were bad. And so the food industry stepped in to sell people what you told them was right, and it created all these freaking trans fats. When we could have just kept eating saturated fats and we'd have been fine. Sodium is not a problem. There was just a worldwide corollary study that showed all-cause mortality and cardiovascular mortality happened the least at around 5 grams of sodium a day. Now, the American dietary recommended allowance for sodium is 2.3 grams or 2,300 milligrams, about half of what this study shows you should be getting. Okay, in case nobody knows, your heart don't beat without sodium. The synapses in your brain, the electricity that's required to function, doesn't work without sodium. Okay, now, if you've already reached the point health-wise where you have hypertension, high blood pressure, sodium will exacerbate that. So, sure, you probably may need to keep your sodium low so you can survive, but you need to change your diet and get that blood pressure down. Then once you get it down, get back on an amount of sodium that keeps us all alive. Let's continue on. Refined grains, 100% agree, but for diabetics, no grains, not just refined grains, no grains. And then added sugar, I'd agree with that. So it's kind of a mixed bag. Okay? This whole eating things in moderation is just stupid. It's just stupid. When you have an acute illness, and make no mistake about it, Diabetes is an acute illness. It is at an acute stage. Your body is being acutely affected by your extreme level of insulin resistance. Your body over the years has progressed to putting out more and more and more insulin to be able to handle the sugar you eat until it finally just shuts down and can't do it anymore. It can't exceed your level of insulin. So in other words, the farther you go, the longer you live eating this American diet that's just crammed full of sugar. And you may say, I don't eat that much sugar. Well, you do. Look on the labels of the stuff you eat, and you'll be so shocked how much sugar you eat because they cram it in everything. If you're not eating like meat right directly out of the meat section, and green leafy vegetables and stuff, if you're eating any of the stuff that's packaged on the aisles, it's crammed with sugar, and you don't know it. You're a sugar addict, and it's killing you. So as your body over the years, insulin resistance goes up. In other words, your cells don't respond as well to the amount of insulin you pump out. So your body responds to that by pumping out more insulin, and it works for a while. Then your insulin resistance gets even higher, and your body pumps out more insulin in response to that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, until finally your body is so insulin resistant, your body can no longer pump out enough insulin to overcome that level of insulin resistance. And the medical community's answer to that is to give you more insulin. Their answer to that is to give you a needle and a bottle of insulin, or either give you a pump with a bottle of insulin and tell you to cram even more insulin into your body. So your serum insulin levels are just insane, and it's wreaking havoc on your cardiovascular system. It's wreaking havoc on everything from your brain right on down to the smallest cells in your body, and it's leading to Alzheimer's, it's leading to cardiovascular disease, it's leading to stroke, it's leading to cancer, it's leading to chronic inflammation, it's leading to arthritis, it's leading to all these things, and that's their answer. Keep eating carbs, and let's just pump you full of insulin. So it's a shame. It's just a damn shame. Now, I talked in last week's episode about who should and who shouldn't do a ketogenic diet and who should be careful on a ketogenic diet. So I want to repeat that quickly. I 100% believe, this is my personal opinion. This is not personal medical advice towards you because I don't give medical advice. This is just my personal opinion. That the absolute best way for a diabetic to eat is to eat a ketogenic diet. But you are at a higher risk of bad things happening because you're changing the way you eat. So once you don't eat carbs anymore, that dosage of insulin you have been taking is going to be way too much. And so you could have sugar crashes, which could, as you well know as a diabetic, are very dangerous. So trying a ketogenic diet requires you to do extra monitoring of your blood sugars. You should do it, I don't know how many times a day. A lot. 6, 8, 10 times a day. You need to know what's going on. You do not need to take insulin. Now, if you can find your doctor, if your local doctor will work with you and say, sure, I understand the ketogenic diet. I know the benefits of it. Absolutely, let's try it and see if we can't reduce your dependence on insulin and other diabetes drugs. And here's a plan for how we're going to monitor it and make it happen. If you have a doctor like that, fantastic, man. Get that doctor on board and work with them. If you don't have a doctor like that, walk out of their office and never go back. Go find you a doctor that will try to achieve your best level of health. Last of all, the symptoms that I mentioned before, all the ones I mentioned, obesity was the one I left off the list. But, and constant exposure to elevated levels of insulin keeps your body in fat storage mode all the time, making it impossible to lose weight. I had somebody message me a couple of weeks ago, and they said, man, I've been a type 2 diabetic for, I don't know what she said, I think it's 8 or 9 years or something. And she told me she was taking insulin, and she's like, it doesn't matter what I do, I can't lose weight. And I told her, I said, you'll never be able to lose weight. When your insulin levels are constantly high like that, the way they have you taking insulin, and your insulin levels are always elevated, insulin is a fat storage hormone. It signals to the body when to store fat and when to use fat reserves. And when it's high, your body is constantly in fat storage mode. It's no wonder you can't lose weight. So you got to get that insulin level down. Well, you can't do that as a diabetic unless you get the carbs down, because you've got to have the insulin. If you're a diabetic and you're eating, how many carbs the average American is eating, 200, 150, 200, 250, 350, 4. or whatever, you got to have that insulin, right? You have to have it. You got to, or else your sugar is going to be through the roof. But if you bring those carbohydrates way down to less than 20 grams a day, you won't need all that insulin. And you can start lowering those insulin levels down to a level that gets low enough that you actually can start accessing your fat stores and losing weight. Nevertheless, I've already done a podcast about that. I encourage you to go back and look at previous episodes and listen to that if you have more interest. Shame on you, American Diabetes Association, and shame on the medical profession that continues to push this method of treatment. Now, I know some doctors push it out of ignorance, and I know some of them just push it because they don't want to lose their license, because there's such a thing as standard of care. And I've heard a lot of people ask, I didn't really know much about standard of care until my mom got diabetes. But as a doctor, you're pretty much required to follow standard of care, or you open yourself up to lawsuits. You open yourself up to losing your medical license. And so pretty much, even if you believe something different than what a standard treatment is, you're kind of forced to just keep treating people that way. Because once you deviate from standard of care, you open yourself up to all kinds of lawsuits. You open yourself up to being, sued by individuals, as well as from the profession. You open yourself up to losing your medical license, using your ability to practice. And so for doctors, even conscientious doctors, they can find themselves caught between a rock and a hard place where they may know something may perform better with their patient, but they can't recommend it because it would go against standard of care and get them in a buttload of trouble. So these are all things you have to keep in mind. There's some great doctors out there, some that are trapped, some that are breaking the mold and doing what's right, and some that are trying to find ways to get it worked into where it's accepted as standard of care. So hats off to all those people, doctors, nurses, and all those that are fighting the good fight. Thanks for listening to the podcast today. Reminder, if you need coaching for weight loss, I am happy to do that. Work with you on a one-on-one basis. You just shoot me a private message on any of the social medias. And remember, my username for any of them is Fat Guy Podcast. The best way to get me would be through Facebook or Instagram or even Snapchat. Fat Guy Podcast is the username. Shoot me a message, and we'll see if maybe I can't work with you. And subscribe. Download the Spreaker app, Spreaker. Download the Spreaker app. Search for Fat Guy Podcast and subscribe to it and follow it. And above all of those things, the most important is share this on your page. I say this every time I do a podcast. You never know whose life you will change 180 degrees because they see this, they listen to it, their eyes open, and they change their life forever. I know that's possible because that's what happened to me. I saw something that was shared. I started reading about it, and it changed my life forever. And you could be a part of that life-changing process. Thanks so much for listening to the episode today. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for sharing, and we'll talk to you next time.